We're going to have a panel talking some about med tech and med device investing and some of the trends, but also try to pass along some kind of helpful pointers for entrepreneurs as you're out there trying to do the hard work of raising money for your companies. Maybe as a start off, though, just to help us kind of read the audience a little bit, raise your hand if you're a CEO or entrepreneur of a company. Okay, great. And if you're with a, say, a strategic partner or investor type organization, raise your hand. A few. Okay. So at least we have some sense for who we're talking to, so that's great. What we're going to do here is we've got a few topics to talk about for the next 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open up the floor for questions and just kind of see what you guys want to talk about and try and respond to some of your questions, and we can dig deeper into any of the concepts that come up or whatever prior to that when we get to the Q&A part. With that, though, I'm going to ask our panel here to just go down. It will start with you and maybe just introduce yourself, your organization, and a little bit about what you guys are looking for when you're looking to partner or invest.
Sure. So my name is David Stoffel. Happy to be here this morning. I know everyone's kind of jammed with JP Morgan activities, so it's always good to participate in these things and get to know more people in these types of settings. So I've been with Intuitive for about 10 years. I'm currently Vice President of Marketing and Business Development. I've run a variety of different things, from market access to international product launches. But right now we're focusing on developing our corporate development capabilities, so a lot of licensing, acquisition types of activities. Background is an MD, MBA out of University of Chicago, did investment banking, and then actually did venture capital for about 6 years as well. Intuitive really looks for technologies that are going to help extend our robotic technology into new types of marketplaces and developing new types of capabilities. So, for example, we've licensed stapling and vessel sealing technologies when we want to get into general surgery. We're also very focused on imaging capabilities. We have a robot. It's probably the largest most powerful computer that is sitting in the OR. So there's a lot of processing capabilities. So we're looking for things that can enhance the imaging that's going through our endoscope. We have things for like near-infrared, vascular imaging, lymphatics. We're looking to add new types of capabilities of what you can see beyond just white light reflection. So that's a little bit of what we look for, and look forward to hearing more ideas from the rest of you.
Great, I'm Kathy Jordan. I run a non-diluted evergreen fund at Drexel University. And so how many of you, I have another question, how many of you have actually spun a technology out of the university? A few people, so. So I provide early stage funding basically to de-risk those technologies on their way out the door. And to that end, my goal really is ultimately, I think as most of us, to bring products to market that save, extend, and improve lives anywhere in the world. And so we want to do that through the commercial process. And like any investor, then I look for really what's going to be the exit for this technology. Can this technology exit? So we're very focused on intellectual property and also looking at the team of people that are assembled there to do this work, right? Is it the right team? Do they have the knowledge of the healthcare space that they're going to need in order to ensure the right product market fit and really stick together to see this early stage technology all the way through? And then can we bring in the right people to fill out that team in terms of the executive leadership that can actually build that commercial company into something that can get out to the market. So obviously we also look at market, regulatory issues, right? What's going to be the lift to get this technology out the door? And then that's how we make our decisions. So really no different from any other investor in that we're really kind of planning towards that exit, whether it's a commercial product as the exit or an acquisition or an IPO.
Hello, I'm Brian Brolke. I'm a partner at Volcano Capital. I'm subbing in for Kevin, so I'll give you a little bit more background than maybe I normally would. So see, I come from a strategy consulting background. I was Duke undergrad, worked at Bain & Company, and doing internal corporate strategy at Philips over in Amsterdam. Went to Harvard Business School when I joined Volcano a little over 8 years ago now. So I'm a partner, run private investments. So as far as what our fund is, we have a $150 million fund. We're essentially a family office, so a single LP. And we look for early stage medical device investments, typically $2 to $3 million per round, and tap out at 10 to 15 of life of the investment. We're really looking for something that's compelling and puts a complete picture together. So we start most obviously with the unmet clinical need marketplace, and what makes it compelling from a technology perspective. Then we diligence everything else, what are the incentives, what's the regulatory pathways, the reimbursements, their strong patent protection, strength of the management team, how much capital you need. We're kind of looking to make sure that everything is cohesive and hangs together in a compelling package.
So my name is Ronald Dornbos. I work for Takeda Pharmaceuticals. So anybody here in the room that has not heard of Takeda? Well, that's great, because last year there was still a couple of hands going up. So yeah, it's nice. I think everybody also heard about the acquisition of Shire. So till yesterday we had about 30,000 people. Since this morning we had like 50,000 plus. So operating in 80 countries, so pretty big company. Focus areas, neuroscience, oncology, gastroenterology, vaccines, and now with the Shire acquisition, also rare diseases. And I joined Takeda about 1.5 years ago. Before that I was a consultant. I have a background, academic background, microbiology, PhD, and worked for about 6-7 years at Harvard Medical School doing fundamental research on Parkinson's. And then, like I said, moved into consulting and have ever since then been working with basically big pharma strategy programs and such. And now I help Takeda with their technology and innovation strategy. And we're really looking for technologies that can help with any of these core areas: neuroscience, oncology, gastroenterology, vaccines, and now rare diseases. And a lot of those technologies are related to drug delivery. So that's one area where we have a big focus of technology that can help us to bring the medications to the right place in the body. Other areas that I look at are, for example, digital health, things related to AI, machine learning, big passion of myself as well. And so anything that you're working on in that respect, see me later and tell me about it, because it will be very interesting.
Great, and I'll finish up. So I'm Randy Scott. I'm a partner with.
Can you guys just make sure to speak into the microphones a little bit better? It's
Okay.
a little bit hard to hear.
Okay.
Got it. So I'm Randy Scott. I'm a partner with HealthQuest Capital. We're a revenue stage investor across healthcare, including medical devices, diagnostics, healthcare IT, etc. We don't do biopharma, but since it's revenue stage, that sort of speaks for itself, I guess. We're currently investing out of our second fund, which is a $230 million fund. Our typical investments for us are kind of in the $7 to $12 million range for an initial investment, and then we would reserve to do 20 or 25 over the life of the relationship. The panel here, I think, is well situated in that you've got sort of very early stage coming out of the university, kind of seed, Series A stage, I think with Volcano, strategic investors, and then we're sort of a Series B investor. So I think that probably covers the landscape for anybody that's in this room thinking about raising money. We did a prep call, of course, before the panel here. One of the things, as we were just chatting, that came up was kind of talking about the differences we see in how entrepreneurs communicate with us as investors. And there's quite a broad range of effectiveness in how entrepreneurs communicate to us as investors. And we thought that would be worth spending a few minutes talking about. So I don't know if anybody wants to take the first crack at just thoughts on best practices for entrepreneurs, both reaching out to or maintaining contact and that kind of thing with investors. Anybody want to take the first crack at that?
I love it when people read my website, which has a lot of information. And then I'll honestly say, I love sitting down with people, and so I do tell people, this sounds like a total cliche, but I tell them I want to get to know you early, right? Even if we have not actually filed a patent on your work, I still want to get to know what it's about so that I can follow that technology for a few years before we actually put that early stage translational money into it. So I'm talking to people when they're still doing that very basic research funded by the federal government. But I do really appreciate when people have actually read all the 6 or 7 pages on my website and fully understand what the criteria are that I use in terms of making those decisions for an early stage investment. And often that sets apart the faculty members that I'm going to work with and the ones that I don't end up working with.
Yeah, for us, fundraising is really a conversation, and investing is kind of a conversation. And just like you don't usually have the first conversation and then just go right into an investment, it's anything that you can get early and have something even when you're not fundraising, especially when you're not fundraising, getting in front of people and having them get to know your technology, getting to know you, so that when you reach the stage where you are fundraising, it's actually there's some familiarity with the technology, there's some familiarity with you. And so persistence, getting in front of people, having those early stage conversations, realizing you're setting the stage for maybe 12 or 18 months later, I think those are really important conversations to have.
Yeah, I think also to Katie's and David's point, start early because it takes a long time and things in industry unfortunately do not go as fast as the small companies. And so you need to have a long breath and really need to keep mailing and keep getting in touch with the people because, especially after events like these, people like myself get flooded with emails and it's just a deluge of stuff that you get to look through. So that's one thing, keep going and another thing to relate to the point, keep it short. I also agree with Katie's point, if you're doing something in a field that's completely not related to Takeda, don't get in touch. I mean, take a little look at what we are doing and if you get in touch with us with something that's completely not relevant, then why even bother and why wasting our time? And if I come across such people later again and they might be doing something in a field that might be related, of course there's this light bulb that goes up and says, oh, this guy contacted me before, and so I would take it too serious. So 2 points, and then I don't think, looking here in the room, many of you look very gray hair, seasoned, how shall I put that nicely? Anyway, you have also
be polite.
Indeed. You have also entrepreneurs that just come out of academia, they have this brilliant idea, they want to conquer the world, what they're working on is really the most fantastic thing that they have ever invented in the universe. They come to us and almost the first thing they ask, well, we need to have CDA in place. That's obviously not how it works. I mean, don't be afraid of us stealing your ideas. We are not in the business of stealing ideas. We don't have time to steal your ideas. I wish we had. But also think of the PR drama that would happen if we would steal small companies' ideas. So don't be too afraid to share a little bit more information up front to also get people in industry interested for what you're really doing. And I think a lot of people, especially when coming right out of academia, are too afraid to reach out to us and sharing their ideas. And they should do that more often. And we're not writing. We are just people like everybody else. So.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with everything that's been said on the panel so far, obviously. But one of the things that's nice about having a longer-term relationship is that you can really see the company and the entrepreneur deliver on their promises. I think I built a lot of credibility when they go to ask money later on. They said, "This is what I said I was going to do a year ago, and I've done all that, and now I'm raising this to get to the next milestone." Be a lot more credibility than if you're chronically delayed on your timelines. The next thing I'd say is kind of a summary of what everybody else is. Just try to make my job as easy as possible. So if you're succinct, if you're in my sweet spot in terms of investment criteria, and you communicate clearly and effectively, that goes a long way, frankly. And I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned so far is if you can get a personal relationship or a referral from somebody that I know, that definitely get you to look. But it's not necessary, just to be clear. I read all my emails. If I'm not responding, it's usually because it's for like a solar farm or something that's completely outside of our investment mandate. So if you don't bother reading mine, I'm not going to bother responding. But that's it.
Yes, I think that's a great point, actually, that you kind of touched on there, and it comes back to what Kathy was talking about reading the website or whatever. We try, as a general policy, we try and respond to every email we get, but we're getting, hundreds and hundreds a week. So it's not so easy, and a lot of times it's, in fairness, a one-sentence response or something like that, just so we can say we responded to everything. But at the same time, from my perspective, if they reflect something from the website in the email, it doesn't have to be like an essay, but just something that lets us know, oh yeah, I saw in your email that you guys like X, or you've done, other molecular diagnostics investments or whatever, so you might be interested in what I'm doing. That kind of, okay, now I realize you invested at least 5 minutes in researching us before you sent the email, so I'll invest 5 minutes and give back a thoughtful response. But you guys kind of feel the same way?
Yeah, I would also say, like Brian said, also, if you don't hear back from us immediately, it does not always mean that we're not interested. I mean, there's so much coming on our desk that, try it again and again and again. Maybe not 10 times, but 2 or 3 times is definitely fine. So, and separate that with a month or 2. And, a lot of people unfortunately don't do that. They think when there's no response, there's no interest. And so they don't try anymore. And that's really unfortunate because a lot of opportunities, are missed by that.
Or I think by the same token, if I say no for a specific reason, and you subsequently solve that reason, a lot of people don't come back.
Yeah.
you should be, have a list of investors that, all right, this is what it would take to get to, this is where I need to get them interested, or I need to solve this particular problem, and then do that and reach back out. A lot of people, I think, just kind of, they said no a year ago, so I'm not going to talk to them.
And something Brian said, I don't think references are completely necessary, but it is a great way to separate yourself out from the pack. For us in particular, for a strategic, we have a pretty large installed base in hospitals, so we have a lot of contact with a lot of physicians. I will prioritize references from a surgeon that I know, or a surgeon that is important to Intuitive, saying, hey, this technology is interesting, you really should take a look at it. So it's worth the time to invest and see, are there surgeons that we have that overlap with these strategics? I'm assuming the same thing with investors. You get a reference from an investor, someone they've co-invested with. Those things are great ways for your email to kind of rise up and make sure it gets that extra read. Like us, we try to read everybody, but you will pay more attention to something where you see someone that you respect or know saying, hey, pay attention to this.
Yeah, I think building on that's a great point, of course. Building on that too, I don't think you have to overthink the warm introduction too much either. Because at least in my mind, I even get other entrepreneurs that we've looked at and said no to or whatever will occasionally introduce me to some other friend, and that's fine too. Just the fact that there wasn't an introduction, same kind of thing, So other people have invested a few minutes of time into this, so I'm going to feel a little bit more obligated to invest a few minutes of time and provide a thoughtful response. I have a question for the entrepreneurs here. Who here uses some system to track your contacts with investors, whether it's index cards or a CRM or a spreadsheet or whatever? Okay, so it's probably a meaningful percentage. I think I was an entrepreneur for years, so I raised money for 4 different companies. And I always did that. I think that comes back to what Brian was saying, which allows you to track the comments, and so then you can go back through those. I'm old enough, it was on index cards in my case, but you can go back through those and look and say, oh yeah, well this person said they don't invest until I have reimbursement, and I just got my code or whatever, and I should reach back out to them, that kind of thing. Speaking on that topic a little bit, about reimbursement, how much do you guys focus respectively on the kind of the reimbursement healthcare economics topic? Is that super important? Is it important just to have a vision for it, or realized vision, or what's your thoughts on that?
All right, I'll jump in. For us, it's really important. When I started doing this type of work about 7 years ago, we did fun things that people would say, oh, it's a reimbursement play. Current reimbursement code is, $200, you're gonna get a new one, well, it'll be reimbursed $800, and we would jump in on things like that. We actually don't do that anymore, since the mantra is, does this lower healthcare costs, right? So we are really cognizant of whether or not we can see that it's going to lower healthcare costs, but also demonstrate that through some sort of clinical trial that is not 10 years long with an endpoint that's crazy, right? And that is often a big decision point for us, that if the endpoint to show that you're reducing healthcare costs is the only one we can see is that sort of like 5 years out and tracking a patient population for that long a period of time, then those are the kinds of things that we'll sort of say we need to step away from that until the reimbursement situation is a little bit clearer on that front in terms of driving down those healthcare costs.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what Kathy said for Takeda as well. Although we also take sometimes some risk because, especially in the digital space, for example, where regulations, of course, a lot of moving plays, and nothing has really been set in stone yet. So if we see something really interesting and we think that's really worth investing in, and we see it will really make a difference for patients, then we think we will also be able to get the reimbursement process in line with those inventions eventually. So then we also are willing to take some risk. But mostly, like Kathy said, there should be really a value, and that should be clear from the beginning.
Yeah, from a strategic standpoint, we will absolutely take reimbursement risk if there's a technology that doesn't have a clear reimbursement pathway, but it has to have a lot of clinical, outsized clinical benefit. One thing, though, I'd say from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I think it's imperative actually for you to untangle it and present it very clearly to the investor or the strategic. Because this is something that it's usually presented, it's a little opaque, said, hey, we have reimbursement or we don't have reimbursement. It's something that we untangle, and it just gets very confusing and slows the process down. So I think from you as an entrepreneur, you have to have a very clear view on how is this going to be reimbursed, does this actually lower costs, or just be upfront, this is going to raise costs, but we think it's going to have a huge clinical benefit, and this is what we're thinking. So I think it's very important right up front to have that kind of conversation because it sets the expectation and frames the conversation well from our perspective.
And to David's point, and a little cliche, but underbuild it well. I mean, you see so many slides where market of 5 billion, market of 10 billion, 15 billion. I mean, really come with numbers that make sense, and it's nice to have the billion-dollar numbers on the slides maybe, but for the people working in the field, I mean, it's not really relevant. So make sure that you underbuild what you're selling.
Every deal I've seen, even at the university level, people tell me that they're doing $1 billion market. So there's not that much money in the economy.
And to us, it actually enhances credibility if you have a thoughtful market analysis. We've seen plenty of it's $1 trillion market in China type of analysis. And, it just says, okay, maybe this person wasn't approaching this in a thoughtful way. It's fine to have a small market, just be upfront about it, present the analytics. We'll measure something based on what's the clinical benefit, how relevant it is to our product pathway. It's okay not to present $1 billion market.
Yeah, so David, you brought up a phrase just a moment ago, you were talking about the reimbursement and being able to untangle the story, which I think is kind of important overall with the stories that we hear, not just the reimbursement part. Do you guys struggle at all with getting called pitches or whatever where you're 5 minutes in and you can't even figure out what they're talking about? Is that, maybe it's just me, I don't know.
More often than I'd like.
Yeah, so I
I
know.
do pitch coaching and still see pitches that I'm like, but that's not what I asked you to do, and I still don't understand it.
So I would encourage you to kind of along that line to make sure that you really do fine tuning. Of course, you always hear the advice about having an elevator pitch and all that, which is important, of course. But have a 1 minute pitch, a 10-minute pitch, and a 30-minute pitch, or something like that. And it's a fine line you got to walk because you can't assume that the person you're pitching to really understands what you're doing, even though we might smile and nod our heads and act like we do. We're probably faking it. But at the same time, we might not be faking it, so you don't want to treat us like idiots either, so you kind of have to walk that fine line. But I do think it requires some practice.
Yeah, and also take into account the different culture, because when you pitch in Asia or in Europe, it's quite different than pitching in the US. So really take that.
Do you think it's more formal or what?
More formal and from others in Europe, and as a European, I would say much more over the top, and then we come again to the $1 billion kind of numbers. But which I was just saying, don't do it, but you need to do a little bit of that to get the attention of the people in the US, more so than in Europe. So that's definitely something that you want to take into account.
Yep.
And I would just encourage the entrepreneurs to think through what the purpose of the meeting is. I'd say early on with the pitch, you're trying to get my attention. You're trying to get me to invest my time, my resources into diligencing and investigating your specific business. I'd And so you need to have a compelling hook, have the story very tight, and sell me on why I should spend time. You don't have to answer all my questions in the first 5 minutes. Have a presentation that's like all over the map, but it needs to be clear, representative of the actual story, detailed story that the build is later on, and to show you that the whole story hangs together, that you're credible, and that's worth me spending time on. And then we can go into the 2-hour meeting and specific calls with regulatory experts where they're on specific topics, and then we can get the full story. But I caution you against shading things in too favorable a way, or having things that convey that you're not credible. Like if you think your early stage valuation is $200 million, like that's easy for me to be like, well, I'm not going to get there. It doesn't matter how good it is. Like I'm just not going to get there. Yes, that's easy for me to say. I'm not going to spend my time.
Yep, right.
I think just having a clear articulation of the problem you're trying to solve and how you're solving it. Those first 2 steps are just critical, and I think that grabs your attention. First, it's a problem. I'll hear the articulation of the problem, and I'll agree, hey, that's a problem that I've been looking to solve as well. You got me there. Then if you look at your solution and say, hey, that's a pretty elegant way to solve that problem. I think if a pitch has those 2 things right up front, that grabs me, grabs my attention, and allows me to kind of dig a little bit deeper. But a lot of people kind of beat around the bush, so to speak, and just dive right into it. This is what we're doing. Be straightforward. Sometimes an investor will say, hey, look, this isn't the issue for us. That's a great outcome for you and for us, because then we can both save time.
I say conversely, the worst thing you can do is say something or represent something in your deck that I know to be false. That's like I'm immediately done. So don't be too cute in terms of positioning it or trying to cover over the warts, because it really blows your credibility.
Yeah, and honestly, you want us to get to if we're going to end up in a no anyway, it's to your advantage as well as ours to get there relatively quickly. And then last thing I would add to all this too is remember that we're investing in business ideas, not in products, technology, science. So at the end of the day, in any length pitch, you've got to include something in there that convinces us that there's a really good business opportunity in there. And that's going to get our interest a lot more than the greatest science in the world. We care about the science too, because it creates business opportunities and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, there's got to be a business to invest in. Let's shift gears and talk some about, kind of after the investment, if you will, and as these guys are building their companies and have the end in mind and thinking about positioning for M&A, which is for most of you is how the liquidity will take place for the investors. Some people will be lucky enough to do an IPO, but especially with a couple of strategics, but with everybody, what are some of the pitfalls that these guys can avoid as they are, they've maybe raised their Series A and they're starting to build out the organization and launch products and all that kind of stuff? What are some of the pitfalls they can avoid from positioning themselves for an M&A later?
Yeah, we were talking about that, of course, on the phone a little earlier as well. I think focus is very important. So once the companies get money, they have a tendency, not all of them, but some of them have a tendency of focusing too broad, and so they lose the key focus, and that distracts them. It gets them off the right path. They might find interesting stuff on the right hand, on the left hand. So it's very tempting, because once you have the money to deviate from your original path, it's sometimes tempting, but definitely something that you shouldn't do, because you make promises to the investors and they're expecting something in return, and those sideways are not what they expect from you later on. So that's one thing, but there's many more things I would do.
No, I think it's a cliche, it's probably common sense, but it's worth saying. I always know to enter the M&A process from a position of strength. And that's an obvious thing, but it's something that strategics do pay attention to and say, hey, can they defend their valuation at this point? How desperate are they? So again, I think having conversations from an M&A perspective early and engaging them when you have insiders that can support the valuation, or you kind of have a go-it-alone strategy, you're going to get a premium valuation there. If you don't have that robotic strategy, if you don't have those things, you will get, you won't get the premium valuation that you could otherwise get. And so I think it's negotiating from a position of strength. Now you can say, hey, we don't always have that option, and I think that's the reality. But just know that that will impact the valuation of the return that you'll get.
Yeah, and I remember from the phone, and I don't know who of you were saying that, but when you're starting and you get the money, of course you have the money also to get CROs and other third parties involved. And be very careful and be very selective who you're getting involved with, because that can break or make your deal later. Because if you get involved with the wrong CROs, then that can be really a pain to get out of that deal later on, and it can influence a lot of processes down the road. So I don't know who of you was saying that.
And there's always a conversation. I'm going to say this in a little self-serving way. If you get a Medtronic or an Intuitive on your board, or if they've invested, does that scare away the other investors? I can say from our perspective, it's actually a positive. If we see a J&J or a Medtronic already invested, we feel like that's some sort of validation of the company and validation of the technology. And so that gets a little bit extra look from our perspective. And I think it's favorable too, because you want that dynamic of someone saying, hey, there's an insider here who has the inside story. You guys have to get more involved and move faster here, because there is a competitive dynamic at play. So we actually view strategics. We absolutely invest or buy a company that has had a strategic investor. We've been part of M&A processes where we've been an equity investor and another company has come in and have seen that play out really well and favorable for the company. You can kind of manage and play up that competitive dynamic.
Hey, so Brian, I'm curious from your perspective, this topic of having a strategic investor is an interesting one that we all wrestle with, going both ways. But do you guys have a view, if you like it or not like it, or I know different firms have different perspectives?
Yeah, I think so. We see it in a couple of portfolio companies who are taking strategic investors. I would say I love it if there are no rights attached. I'd say more commonly they try to get either distribution rights or an option to acquire, and then that gets a little more nuanced in terms of what specific rights you're giving away with the equity investment. But I would say without those rights, it's unambiguously a good thing.
I think our view is, I agree with that, of course, that when the rights get attached, especially like a right of first refusal or something like that, can be a real poison pill kind of thing. Other than that, I think our view is one strategic investor is okay. Two strategic investors is actually great, because it keeps everybody honest, so to speak, at the table too, and avoids any of the potential negative things that can happen. So,
It does, and I think once you do take that money, there's a little bit more nuance in terms of how to run the board meetings and what gets discussed in what format, and so you have to pay attention, particularly if they're in a competing space. So it's something worth paying attention to it, but I think in that net, it's a good thing without rights. And with rights, you should probably still do it, but try to negotiate it.
Yeah, right. Of course, sometimes, hey, you need money, you take it from wherever you get it too, so I understand how that works for sure.
One just thing to add on that, in defense of taking rights. It's actually a very good source of non-dilutive capital. And I think when you are negotiating with a strategic, even with Intuitive, we've done plenty of deals where we'll make an investment for some sort of rights, but it's non-dilutive. And I think that's a trade-off then between, okay, the rights you're giving up relative to the ownership that you'll maintain. And I think that's a discussion that each company has to have. But when you are giving up those rights, don't necessarily think that an equity investment is necessary when they're giving something up. You can negotiate a non-dilutive investment with others.
Yeah, well, that certainly changes things too, because then cap table impact and that kind of thing. Going back to the, kind of making the right decisions to prepare yourself for eventual M&A and that kind of stuff. What about shortcuts and advice that we give the group on that? Because you're an entrepreneur, you've got very limited money, and you're trying to get to market or whatever, and sometimes you take shortcuts, but sometimes that can backfire too. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one I see quite commonly is getting a 510K but not on label for the specific use that you tend to market it for. And I'd say say that's always a bad idea. You can actually do it. You can get it approved and everything, and you can get it on the market, and it might help you enroll your clinical trial faster, and do the IRBs quicker or something. But what we've seen is that the strategics don't want to take the risk of promoting off-label, and so you're doing yourself a disservice if you think you can get to an exit without having it on-label. So that's one shortcut that I would caution against. Another thing I'd say is if you're going to use a contract manufacturing design house, I would propose it's better to go with a bigger guy that's already worked with strategics or manufacturers for strategics that have passed through quality systems, and it helps smooth the due diligence later on versus some rinky-dink local manufacturer that maybe hasn't done that before. That'd be another shortcut I'd say is maybe watch out. I'll keep thinking.
Yeah. Well, we're winding down here, so let's open up for questions and see if we've got any questions out in the audience.
Hey, David, you mentioned about investing for rights, but not dilutive. What would be the typical ask of an investor in terms of the rights? What would be the term?
Yeah, in terms of the rights from Intuitive's perspective, frequently we negotiate for robotic rights. So, we'll leave you the manual or like the laparoscopic or the open approaches, but then we'll negotiate and say, hey, look, the application of your technology as it goes through robotics, that would be owned by Intuitive. And we view that as a win-win because frequently small companies don't have the means to monetize robotics. And so we can go out there and give you validation, give you distribution, and get you access to doctors and markets you otherwise wouldn't have been able to. And that kind of paves the way for you to commercialize from a laparoscopic or an open perspective. So we try to frame that as a win-win type of scenario. But we have absolutely paid substantial non-dilutive capital for robotic rights for companies. And I think it's worked out quite well in many circumstances. They've leveraged that to drive their own commercialization, drive evaluation. They've gotten a good return. One thing I would add, just because M&A is a frequent topic, and look at it from our perspective, just understand also M&A is still individual and personality driven, even within a strategic. We think about a Medtronic, you think about an Intuitive, you think about a J&J and say, oh, it's kind of a monolith, we just present it to them. There is still M&A. M&A is still driven by an individual champion within that company. And if you can't say, hey, this person within Medtronic or this person within Intuitive is really excited about this technology, you're probably not going to get anywhere from an M&A perspective. So it's developing that individual champion and having that relationship with someone who knows your technology and can vouch for you. That is probably going to be your advocate within the company, and that's how we get. That's how a lot of M&A is driven. Just doing the blind presentations probably not as powerful, and you're not going to get the traction.
It's great. Other questions?
Can you share some of the stats? How many companies you looked at investing last year? The typical amounts you invested? How many you invested in?
Sure. We made 5 or 6 new investments last year. Of course, we make follow-ons all the time. And for us, so at the beginning, kind of $7 to $12 million is a typical initial investment. And I would say, so if we did 6 last year, let's say probably 4 to 5 is actually our target, so slightly busier than normally.
My stats are pretty easy. I deploy up to $800,000 a year, so in chunks of $75,000 to $200,000, and I have an active portfolio of about 30 technologies and startups that I work with at any given time that are at various stages of development, whether we're building a startup around that or like my main goal here is that I'm really sell side, like most of you, meeting with investors for the startups that we've spun out.
So on our side, we see probably 2-3 different deals a day. Varies day to day, week to week. That's a pretty good average. Last year for us was a little bit of a strange year. We got four exits last year, so we're pretty busy with that. So we didn't do any new deals. We're just supporting our existing deals. But we are structured as a family office, so that capital is returned into like an evergreen fund. We can keep investing. So I think this gets turned on going forward. We didn't do any de novo investments last year.
So personally, I see probably between 500 and 700 deals or so on a yearly basis, and it's very dependent because one year, and dependent on like the fit with the organization. Some years we have a better year than other years. So last year I had 6, 7 or so that were moved forward. This year I'm talking about 2018, probably like 3 or so. So it varies, and it's very dependent on the strategy, what's happening in the company. For example, in the neuroscience arena, what kind of clinical trials are we starting, what do we have in the pipeline? If there's something in the pipeline that fits with what you're doing, then obviously you have a better chance to get in. And so depending on what we come across, the amount of deals that we get over the floor and what we're really investing in varies.
From our perspective, if you put in product development agreements, which are usually coupled with licenses, so not necessarily equity, we'll probably do between 10 and 15 deals a year. Equity agreements will probably do anywhere between 3 and 5 agreements. To get to that number, we're probably screening similar ratios as a couple hundred companies. What we'll go through.
Okay, good. Other questions? So, as you guys are out talking to your portfolio companies or just other entrepreneurs that you're friends with or whatever, and they're thinking, I need to raise money a year from now or 2 years from now or something like that. So they're starting to think about it, but they're maybe not actively fundraising. What kind of advice would you give to those entrepreneurs to actions to take today that's going to position them to be successful raising money from investors 12 to 24 months from now?
Well, talk with us and really get an understanding also what we are looking for in the investment. And saying that, for example, we really like of course, de-risking. If you can get proof of concept in animals, that's a big step. If you can get to that point, then you suddenly become much more attractive to us than if you're not there yet. And so, of course, if you know that already 2 years in advance, you know that you need to work to that point to really get it. And there's some other points that you can mention in that respect as well.
I can't underscore the importance of follow-up. So that I have the opportunity to work with a lot of startup entrepreneurs through my work, and it's fascinated me the ones who are successful. A lot of it is showing up for work every day and answering their emails, and as opposed to the ones that I have to follow up with. Where, for example, last month I had somebody that had 3 investors who needed to see a deck, and it took me a month of emailing him to say, "Where's your deck?" to send to 3 investors. Right? So the importance of follow-up, really, right? That's showing up and putting one foot in front of the other and sending a reply email wins every day.
Yeah, I think somebody said it on our pre-call, but it's worth repeating here. Depth actually matters more than breadth, and so if you can get a proof of concept from a commercialization standpoint with 10 surgeons, and all of a sudden they adopted the technology for 100% of their practice, that actually matters more to us than if you have 100 surgeons using it probably 1% of the time. So really getting that proof of concept, I think, from a commercialization standpoint of how deep this can penetrate, I think that also applies to a proof of concept in terms of use cases and proof of the concept that it's actually going to work. But I think being able to show that depth of penetration is really important. And the good news is it's probably less expensive than trying to go out and get 1,000 doctors to go try your technology.
I think that's a great point, by the way. Both for acquirers and investors, that's a really important part, because we're trying to look at it and say, how can we just multiply something that's already happened? So if one salesperson got 10 surgeons and they're all using it every day, well, then it's easy to do the math and say, well, I'm just going to have 10 salespeople then, and it'll probably work out, as opposed to you've got 10 salespeople and none of them are actually profitable at the salesperson level.
Yes, I think as an entrepreneur, you should be trying to figure out how you drive the largest value inflection for the least amount of capital. I think it's all about being smart and targeted in how you de-risk the business. And so depending on where you are, it might be commercialization risk, it might be product development risk, it might be regulatory risk, and it might vary, in fact, by the type of business you're investing in. I think that's the critical piece there is how do you de-risk it in a smart, compelling, convincing way. And I think that doing everything you can to think through that up front is going to pay a lot of dividends for these entrepreneurs.
Yeah, one other thought too, I was thinking, Kathy, about your comment about follow-up and all that kind of stuff too. We were talking about this earlier. It occurred to me, if you, what do you do if you send something to us and you don't get a response? Because we've all just sat here and told you we try and respond to every email, so you're not getting a response. What does that mean? Well, of course, it's always possible that your email just got lost, whatever you sent it to us while we were at a conference and we got 75 other emails and it was just somewhere in our box. We innocently missed it. So following up there obviously makes sense. But the other kind of pro tip I'd give you or whatever is what deals we're not interested in on their face are the easiest ones to respond to. So those are the ones I almost always respond to in the same day. So if you haven't gotten a response for me, it probably means there's at least something of interest in what you sent. And so I'm noodling on it, or I'm waiting to talk to my partners about it, or I'm going to do a little bit of Googling on it, I haven't had time, or something like that. So actually no response sometimes can be a good sign. But if you never follow up on it, then, I was busy for a few days, I never got around to talking to my partners, and then I forget about it or whatever. So just that persistent follow-up, without being obnoxious, but also don't just let it lie. I think it's important too.
Don't take this that if you don't get a response to this, it's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, that's true too. Because the next easiest ones to respond to are the ones that are automatically fantastic ideas that I know I want to go further. So yeah, you're somewhere in between there. Any other questions before we wrap up here? We got like 1 or 2 minutes left. Okay, then I think we're going to go ahead and call it a wrap here. We'll be up here for just a moment if anyone wants to come up and ask private questions or anything like that. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.